you everyone again for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. A little bit about myself. For about 15 years now, I have been supporting people with, oh, hold on just one moment. Okay, sorry about that. I have someone in the yard doing some yard work. It just happens to be at this time, so hopefully you don't hear what I hear. Anyway, so about 15 years now, I've been working with doctoral students, with scholars and researchers in the field, different fields, various fields, and feel really lucky to be able to learn from everyone and impart a little bit of knowledge of my own. I started this track, if you will, as a high school English teacher, and really started doing my own research related to literacy and adolescent and adult literacy. And so that's where I kind of come from as far as topically and the field goes. I also had an amazing mentor with Dr. Maria Lehman, and she instilled in me the importance of equitable, cultural, and ethical responsive research practices. And so because of that and her and my experiences with some of you and other people, I'm really hoping at least to be functioning in this responsive way. And so if you want any other resources, I have a couple of resource documents I can share with you about that and some other qualitative resources that I'll share with you too. So let's get on with it. So for today, we will be focusing on these 5 areas: data management processes and the importance of that, our analysis plan. Hang on just one second. It's really loud here. Hold on. Okay, I just don't want to scream in your ear. So, all right, so our analysis plan and then our data analysis processes. On that number 3 line, our analysis processes, I want you to know that this is a very high level presentation, okay? So I will be making some generalizations, but please know that each research design and each analysis process varies depending upon who we use to support, why we chose to do a certain analysis, why we chose to do a certain research design. And because of that, some of those nuances will not be, we won't go over that today. However, I am doing a boot camp later on this month, the last Saturday of this month, and then the first Saturday of August. If you're interested to learn more in depth about the analysis, that's what we'll be covering there. Then we'll also cover participant profiles and our connection to writing. So data management, cleaning, and memoing. First of all, I want to share with you the importance of our research design as we start to move into our analysis. That really helps guide us in what we're paying attention to, what data are important, and then how we perhaps manage that data as far as the files that we create. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Second, we'll talk about digitizing and storing the data, and then data accuracy. The memoing I put here because normally when I'm in my analysis process, I do memoing while I'm doing these, especially the accuracy. And so I put that there as a caveat. Some people do go into memoing and some people don't. It's just more about our preference as researchers. All right. So the research design matters. If I am doing a basic qualitative research or a descriptive design, um, perhaps even a phenomenological study, I might have just a single level organization, participant 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I might, if I only have one interview per person, that might be it. If I have two forms of data from one person, then I might have a file for each participant. Okay, so, but this is the basic single level organization. Here is more of a multi-level organization. This would be appropriate for IPA studies or case study in which we have a different organization, let's say, and then people within that organization, and then perhaps several forms of data within that for each person. Then I might have this multi-level organization. So why is this important? Well, it's important because if I'm going to upload documents into a qualitative analysis software program, I want to keep this level of organization because it helps me understand where I am, first and foremost. It helps me keep the data where it goes. If I'm doing case study or IPA studies, I'm looking at one person or one organization at a time. And therefore, this type of management helps me remember that I need to be looking at one person per time at a time instead of all the data. So here's another example. Again, case study here. I might have 3 participants in each case and then multiple interviews. So that's organizing by the case or by the company, let's say, organization. Over here on the right, there is a organization that's about the type of data we have. And perhaps I want to organize it by that because I'm going to look at the questionnaire first, and then I'm going to revise my interview data based off of that, and then go into my interviews. So just keep that in mind that there are different ways of managing our data. It's just that we want to be intentional about this. So now that we have kind of a structure, we're thinking about the structure of how we might manage our data. What do we need to do to digitize the data? And if we have interviews, what does that look like? Do I have audio files? I need to transcribe them or have a service nowadays do that for me, or Zoom can now do that for us. Am I looking at observational data in which perhaps I'm doing a checklist and taking notes on my observation protocol? And I might then, instead of copying all that, I might just scan those documents. Okay. So these are the types of things that no one ever told me to think about when I was beginning as a researcher, but I'm now very, very aware of this. Once we understand how we're going to digitize the documents, if that's appropriate, sometimes it's not appropriate. Then we want to think about that security and protecting the confidentiality of our participants. So how will we go about de-identifying data? Are we going to use pseudonyms, blurring images if I'm looking at film data, that sort of thing? And I'll just give a nod to pseudonyms here. And one of the reasons why we do qualitative research is to bring the participants closer, not only to us, but to our readers. So I almost always advocate for pseudonyms. However, there are those times when we need an added layer of protection for the participants. Let's say if we are exploring immigration patterns or experiences of immigration, that might be something to where I want to make sure that my participants are protected. And so even with a pseudonym, I don't want to take that risk. And so that might be a time when I might use numbers or I might do a composite, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we go into the individual profiles. Also, what we want to think about is the backup copies. How am I doing this? If I have, if I'm using a qualitative data analysis software program, I might use that as one form of storage, and then I might do my Dropbox or something like that. Okay, so these are the aspects of this managing our data that we want to be really careful with. Okay, and then security statements. If we are using these programs, making sure that in our writing, especially if I'm doing a dissertation or thesis, that I have these security statements from the programs that I'm using to make sure that they are also protecting the data that I'm using. All right, so checking for accuracy. This is probably the most tedious process within our data analyses. But it's so essential, because if the data do not make sense, then it's no good to us. So we really have to do our due diligence in making sure that things make sense. The first level of this is checking, if I'm looking at interview data, checking the audio transcript with, or audio file with the transcript, so that entails me listening and reading at the same time. While I'm doing this, I need to make sure that I am checking for that the data makes sense. And if I need to insert data, and I'll show you some examples of how I do that, then I do that just so that I make sense of it. Now, there are times when I want you to know that with your data, you are the expert. You are the person who is there doing the observations, doing the interviews, and so you are the expert. And if you know that, oh well, that person actually meant X, then you should have that freedom to put that in there. But there is a process that we go through. Another thing that we look for when we are checking for accuracy is identifying vague words. We do this, I just did it. We do this in our everyday talk. We use vague pronouns like the word this or that or it. Those types of words we want to really be careful of in our transcripts. And then the reason why we want to do this is so that we can then share the transcripts or the observation protocols, if that's appropriate, with our participants, so that they can say, yeah, you got this right, or no, I really meant X. And that, again, speaks to our credibility as researchers by doing this due diligence. Okay. So here's an example of how I go through transcripts and make sure that they make sense, make sure that I'm understanding what things are. I do this not totally to where there are no mistakes or anything like that, but I do this as I'm going through and I'm checking for accuracy. I might as well just go ahead and do it, okay? So the bracketed information that I have in yellow that is the process for us. If we are adding something to a transcript, this is how we do it. If I take something out of a transcript, and I don't have that here actually, but I would use an ellipsis or 3 periods in a row. Okay. All right, so now we'll move on to the analysis plan. Tess, how are we doing as far as questions or anything? Are we good to go? I'm going to take her silence as we are good to go. If anybody has a quick question, go ahead and raise your hand or unmute your mic if you're able to do that, or put something in the chat. Okay. All right, we'll continue on. We haven't yet gotten to the good stuff. So, all right, so our analysis plan. I think this is probably in dissertation work the place that is overlooked and minimized the most is in our methods section. Um, a lot of times I'll see people just saying, oh, I'm doing a thematic analysis. And it's maybe a paragraph defining thematic analysis, and that's about it. Unfortunately, that doesn't really give me a whole lot of insight into the process of analyses. So we really want to be explicit and be detailed in what it is we're aiming to do in our plan. And again, that goes back to our research design and the type of analysis that we're doing. Okay. Um, we also in our plan want to be responsive of our participants, our research aims, and then any changes in our understanding. I might start off with one focus and then realize that something else is coming up in the data that is being generated by my analyses. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not plan on this. I need to go in a different direction. Okay. If you are doing thesis work or dissertations, make sure that when that happens, you speak with your chair about that. Some chairs are very open to making changes in qualitative research. But others, they don't like to see changes. So make sure that you know what their preferences are. And then someone had asked, would you talk a bit about member checking in terms of credibility? Yes. So here's that next point. Our member checking is, I would say, if we're looking at trustworthiness, so it's a part of credibility because I'm taking the step and I have made the attempt to have people review their transcripts, and or the better way is my findings. If I share my findings to the participant and say, hey, here's what's coming out and being generated through my analysis, do you agree? Would you organize these topics or these themes in a certain way? If so, how? That to me is a stronger form of member checking. But in terms of if I'm looking at trustworthiness as a whole, and I understand it to be the 4 areas, Dunstan and Lincoln: credibility, dependability, confirmability, and transferability. I think our member checking comes into confirmability. When the participants actually respond to us, that's really about confirming if we are on the right track or not. So, and we'll cover this a little bit more as we move forward. But our plan, our analysis plan, does serve as our part of our audit trail and a place for us to be reflexive. And that is that we are critical of our processes and trying as much as possible to be aware of when my own bias is coming in. I don't necessarily want to push that away, but I do want to be aware of that. And different people have different perceptions and ideas about our bias, if you will. I embrace our bias, but not everyone does. All right. And then our analysis serves as our guide. It doesn't mean that it's an end all be all. Things will likely change, but at least I know what my plan is. Okay. So I tried to get the poll to work this morning and it didn't quite work. So let's go ahead and, if you would mind, just put in the type of analysis that you use or you are currently using. Just put that in the chat for me so I can kind of gauge what type of analysis everyone is conducting at this point. Right. Phenomenological analysis. So a lot of phenomenological and thematic. We have some narrative in there. Um, and there are tons of types of analyses. So I mean, I there's content analysis, there's uh, uh, what's it called? Oh my gosh, there's so many different analyses that are coming forth that are more culturally and racially responsive. And so if you're interested in those forms of analyses, please let me know. I'll um, later on, I'll give you my email and you can contact me. I do have a lot of references on different types of analyses. So, oh, there's a grounded theory in there. That's nice. We don't often have a whole lot of people doing grounded theory. Um, let's see. Oh, there was another one. Yeah. To be determined. All right, all right. Perfect. Thank you all for putting that in there. Oh, and constructivist grounded theory. Yes. Perfect, perfect. Yes, I will definitely share some of those culturally responsive um, forms of analyses with you all. All right, let's go ahead and go on here. So when we envision our analysis processes, again, I keep bringing up the importance of the research design. And so let me just pause on this for a moment. If I'm conducting a case study and I have a multiple case study, then I'm looking at one case and one case only before I go into the other case and analyze that case, because I want to stay in the specific context of that first case. This is also true with IPA, or interpretive phenomenological analysis. We go through and we analyze one person at a time, and we identify their personal experiential themes before we go into the group experiential themes. And so that is one of the reasons why that design is really important. If I am doing a thematic analysis, I could organize my data according to interview question, and I could go that way to where that I'm looking at all the participants' responses of each interview. The danger with that I see some people um, uh, getting into, it's a bit of a trap, is that we start answering the interview question instead of the research question. We don't think broad enough. However, I do think that there's some value of looking at the data set overall by research question. We just have to be careful about what is it that we're trying to generate here. And so remember that our research question always guides us, or research questions always guide us. Okay. We need to consider the type of data we have. If I have visual data, my analysis is going to be different. I need to have a plan that helps guide me. And what am I looking for in the visuals? Am I doing observations? What am I looking for in my observations? Those are the types of things that we want to be thinking about. Theory. How is theory coming into play as I move through my analyses? For some of you, you might be doing a deductive analysis in which theory is guiding everything. It doesn't mean that we don't go into an inductive phase, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But we have these big categories that we're basing things on first, and that's how theory can guide us. And then we want to know, what is our unit of analysis? Is our unit of analysis the uh, the organization, or is it per person, or Is it something else? Is it maybe that I'm actually doing a instrumental case study in which the unit of analysis is the phenomenon? So that's this unit of analysis is very important as we move forward. Whoops. Let me go into, oh yeah, so just case, individual, or group. Yeah. All right. So think about your analysis plan. You have a plan. Is it solid? Is it getting stronger? Is it kind of basic? Is it what plan? Um, be thinking about that as you move forward, especially for those of you in the dissertating process. It can be a lonely process because oftentimes once we pass that proposal stage, people think that we're good to go. We know what we're doing. And then when we go back and we look at our methodology section, we realize, oh my gosh, I didn't help myself out at all here on developing a plan for my analysis. And then we get different things can happen that we might be going in an inappropriate direction. Okay. So just keep these things in mind as you're moving forward. And again, I'm open to talk about this later when we open it up for questions. Okay. So our goals for analysis is to be intentional, to be reflexive, to be aware of when I'm going, oh my gosh, that happened to me too. And so that I can make sure that I write that out and say, oh, wow, I'm really identifying with these participants because I've had similar experiences. And then I need to be critical of myself and going through that. Okay. Another goal, at least for me in analysis, is to be flexible. The participants are the most important piece of this if I'm using data from people versus a document analysis, let's say. But I need to be representative of my participants, and I need to be flexible. If they're telling me that I need to go in a different direction, I need to be able to go in that direction. And I need to be transparent. And this is another part of that audit trail and our plan. We want to be making sure that we are keeping track of our decisions. That document that I put in the chat for you all earlier is an analysis tracking document. Make sure that you utilize something like that. You certainly don't need to use mine, but here, I'll go ahead and post that back in here. But make sure that you have some way of tracking what it is that you set out to do, first of all, and then how is that changing at this point? Okay. All right, there we go. I just dropped that back in there. All right. So qualitative analysis and analytic tracking. If nothing else, qualitative analysis is very messy. Every time I embark on a new study or support someone in their study, this idea of this messiness of qualitative analysis really comes forward. The good news is that it gets clearer as we go. I'm thinking of a couple of people that are in the room that I've been working with, and we're starting to see some bigger things develop and be generated through their analysis. And that's when we know that we are into the good stuff. And yes, Winnie, I agree. The messy part is the fun part. Unfortunately, it can also be very nerve-wracking or daunting, if you will, because we don't feel like we're getting anywhere. But yeah, I agree. I love a qualitative analysis for this point. Um, it is iterative and ongoing. We even with AI now, and this is a little bit outside of this particular presentation. However, we will be doing another analysis session of it regarding AI. It is a long process, even if I am utilizing AI, I still have to be in the loop, and I still have to be being very intentional and very focused on what it is that I'm hoping to generate from the analysis. I am still, the human is still in control here. And that's true with any qualitative data analysis software program, with AI, even with our own manual coding or analysis processes. It takes time. All right. So while AI is exciting, and I've used it, and I'm very excited about the prospects, it's still time intensive, and I don't think that's going to go away. At least if it goes away, I would start to question someone's processes, actually, because it does take time for us to come to understand what the participants want us to know. So inductive and deductive. So if we think of an inductive process, I don't have anything guiding me except for my research questions, okay? The deductive process is when I already have established categories, such as a theory, or I'm using the themes that I discovered in my literature review to guide my analysis. That would be a deductive process. Now, for me, qualitative analysis is always both and, okay? And we'll see a little bit about that. Whoops, it's out of control here. Let me see if I can go back. No, I cannot. Here we go, yes. And then the last thing that I wanted to say here is that we must be identifying relevant data and determining the meaning. It's not about one word or a small phrase. It is about the meaning that's being generated. So when I go into identifying relevant data, I need to have enough of that data to where it makes sense. Just a word or two is not, very few single words are all encompassing to convey even a semantic meaning, let alone a latent meaning, which is what lies beneath the words. Okay. All right, interpretation. So we analyze, as we are analyzing, we are interpreting. And this interpretation is the nuances, the comparing and the contrasting of the participants' ideas. This is where we really come into play in the analysis, because I might look at a set of data and see one thing, and someone else would look at a set of data or the same set of data and see something a little different. That's, to me, the beauty of qualitative research and why we do qualitative research, because the researcher matters. Actually, the researcher matters in quantitative too, they just don't highlight that. Our interpretation is subjective, and it is based upon our biases. Do we want to just be all free flowing with that? No, we do want to hold ourselves in check, but I want to be aware and be transparent of what background experiences I hold that are influencing my analysis of the data and my interpretation of the data. That's the key. It's when people don't do that that's problematic. So embracing the positional and situated nature of data. I love Brown and Clark for this. They really bring in this aspect of positionality, and not only of the researcher, because a lot of times we hear that term for the researcher, but it's really about the data too. Many truths, we have to embrace many truths. We don't have just one truth that we're looking for, which is why in qualitative analysis, or the result of that analysis, our interpretation, our themes, if you will, or our steps in a process, if I'm doing grounded theory, or the story I tell, if I'm doing narrative, they hold many truths going on, not just one or two, but many truths. This is that part where the messy comes back into play. We have to tolerate uncertainty. This is something that is very interesting, and we don't have time to go into it here, but if you haven't started your analysis yet, if you're feeling uncertain, you're doing things correctly. And then this is another aspect of Brown and Clark, and then Mihas and others that I really appreciate is this idea of creativity and being artistic in our analyses. And we can talk a little bit more about that too and how that would come into play. All right, so here is step one of this process. And I think this slide got a little out of order. I apologize for that. But this is about, oops, hang on a second here. This is about me merging in my process of identifying vague words and now gaining familiarity with the transcripts and with the ideas that are being generated. So the purple here, I'm noticing that the language used to talk about professional development conveys a nuanced meaning that language is a part of culture, and I'm questioning because I'm not sure yet. And then in this orange, I'm noticing that these are behaviors related to this organization. So this is just an example of how I work before I go into my formal initial round of identifying relevant data, which some people call coding. So the task of condensing and organizing data is what we are doing. We then interpret the data. And through all this, these are some of the terms that are used: coding, patterning, theming, conceptualizing, theorizing, restoring, horizontalization. These terms are specific to the research design and the type of analysis. So this is why our research design and type of analysis keep coming back into play, because they influence the words that we use when we're representing the data and when we're talking about our processes. This sets up expectations for our readers, whether we realize it or not. Okay. So presenting participant, this is not quite right. I think I missed some slides here. We'll go through this, and then if I've missed some slides, I'll bring those back up. So a lot of people, when they're getting into the analysis piece, actually, let me stop here and ask for some questions. I just need to check my files here. Tess, if you could look at the chat and let me know what questions might be appropriate here.
Yeah, there's a very interesting one about vague words and translating from different languages, which I think is quite important.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, say that one more time.
So the question is asking about the translation, specifically in an African context, where language devices are used and they can't be directly translated. So the meaning is almost lost or less impactful.
Yeah, I think that's when we have to, well, if we know the language, that's the best, right? Then we can make sure that we're representing the language and the ideas appropriately. If we don't, we need a partner to be able to help us with that nuanced meaning and understanding. And I think, quite frankly, that I would encourage people to use the language in the representation of the data and then talk about it in a footnote or perhaps on side in English. I think that we are at the point in hopefully we are becoming more and more at the point in representing diverse languages, diverse ideas, that we need to be using the language. And so to me, I would put footnote, if it were me, I would put a footnote and put the English down below. Of course, if I'm working in a journal and looking to publish, then I need to abide by the journal's rules, but I also want to push the boundaries. And if I think that the language is important enough to show, I want to highlight that language and then give the side note to the English so that we are highlighting that which is our participants. So for me, that's really important, and that's what I would advocate for. I hope that made sense. All right, I did get the wrong slide here, so let me just open this up. It's going to take a minute. It always messes up a little bit before if I put this into presentation mode. So because we're running short on time, I'm just going to stay in this mode here. Tess, is that coming through okay? Can you still see
Yeah,
the
I
slide?
can still see
Okay.
you.
All right, perfect. Let me just close these side buttons here. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's get back to this, the work of qualitative analysis, because this is really important. We familiarize ourselves with the data. We identify relevant data. We have inductive and deductive processes, and we go back and forth between those two processes. I firmly believe that this happens. I see it happening with other people. I know it happens with myself. We never are residing in one only. It's very recursive. Once we identify the relevant data, then we move into this grouping or pattern matching. Again, I think that sometimes it's easy for people to say, oh, I'm first doing this and then I'm going to do this, and it seems very linear. But qualitative analysis is anything but linear. So a lot of times after my first transcript or observation protocol or document, once I get my initial identification done, i.e. coding, then I'm almost always starting to group already. And I'm seeing sub patterns and all this. So I'm now when I'm starting to group and I'm identifying nuances of meaning between a group of data, I'm doing inductive and deductive intermixed. Okay, so I think it's important for us to recognize that this is not a linear process by any means. I think maybe phenomenological analysis is maybe the closest, just because we are working in very specific steps of identifying statements, and our interpretation is just a little bit more involved, and it's different in a phenomenological process. However, I still think that we move back and forth in inductive and deductive. It just comes out a little different. And then our last step, if you will, in a general process is theming, where we're recognizing connections across the data or across the groups. And that aspect is one of those areas that tends to be ever shifting in qualitative research, and people pushing boundaries on that idea of themes. And so we'll leave that there for now. All right, let's see here. All right, so familiarity, that's what I was just talking about in that transcript, going through and reading and listening, gaining an initial understanding, being reflexive. The work of analysis also has to do with coding or identification, data identification. This is design-dependent process. of assigning labels. And we use different language depending upon the design. Okay, so if you're thinking, oh, well, no, I'm actually looking for personal themes at this point, that's because that is specific to phenomenology, and that's the language that we use. But we're still doing the same process, if you will. Okay. A theme, again, is an observed pattern or a produced pattern from my analyses. It is me functioning as the tool, if you will, or the instrument in qualitative analyses. This is where generative AI and large language models are kind of turning qualitative research on its ear, if you will, because people are thinking, oh, well, the researcher doesn't matter as much. No, we still do. We are the one that put the prompts into the generative AI process. So know that it is our production, our generation of what we know to be true in the data. Okay. Down here on the interpretation, I just want to give a nod to semantic meaning and latent meaning. And if someone is doing a descriptive thematic or just a descriptive study, they are very much on the semantic level. We are just looking for the facts. What are the facts? How are people describing something? Okay, but almost all other designs require a little bit deeper interpretation, and that is what is behind those words. What is behind the facts, and that's where we get that latent understanding. Okay. All right. I forget I'm not in. Okay, so I'm going to hit this really quickly, and I want you all to know that if you are up for it and join our boot camp, we'll be slowing down and we'll be going through each of these steps, and we'll have time for you all to give it a go and share your ideas and your thinking about how you are doing analyses, which is why I love doing the boot camp, because I get to learn from you all as well. So in the first round of analyses, we're reading initial ideas, identifying relevant units of codes, segments of data, and then we're assigning those data with a label. This is the familiarization that I showed you earlier, so we're going to bypass that. This is a first round of inductive coding for a small chunk of a transcript. If I'm doing things by hand, I use colors because it helps me identify what words are causing me to think about what labels or meaning. So this is an example of that. So I'll just give you a moment to take a look at that. You see that I have at least 4 different areas here, if not more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5. Okay, so now let's see what a deductive looks like. So you see how now that I have a specific categories, if you will, already, and this was from a theory, I am able to already see patterns here. So this is that bigger, I'm thinking at a more general level. I'm just saying, yeah, this is anxiety, and I'm just dropping things in buckets. If I go back to this inductive coding, I'm going a little slower here in my processes because I'm like, oh, what are they talking about? I need to have a name, okay? But in the deductive process, it's kind of a little bit quicker. However, if you'll notice, I've gone ahead and identified some areas here. Overwhelmed feelings, it's a difficult process, and then there's this aspect of time. So I've already started to identify these nuances of meaning, which is an inductive process, okay? This will save you time. If you are going through and analyzing your data and identifying those relevant segments, by identifying the meaning and the nuances of understanding, you will save yourself some time later on. All right, so tracking your process. I want to say, hey, here I did my initial coding. I've done by June 1st. I ended up with 15 codes. And then I give myself a little note of, oh, the idea of blank, emotions really emerged. And then you see my other note there. And then here's what I do after every time that I quit a session. I leave myself some breadcrumbs and I give myself notes to be able to pick up from when I start my next session of analyses. And so here are some different things that I do to help keep myself, to remind myself of what I was thinking and to start where I left off. Second round of analysis, I'm going to go through this really quickly because we're running out of time. I knew I would run out of time. So we're combining light codes. We're looking at the meaning being conveyed and trying to find patterns. This is where I start making some very intentional decisions and where I come to new understanding. Now we see that I have organized the data according to overwhelmed feelings. And I've got all the data here for David regarding those overwhelmed feelings. But look at on the right-hand side, I've still got some things about what's causing this overwhelmed feeling. All right. And that is where I'm at this nuance of understanding still. So I'm at a deductive phase when I start putting things in, because I'm like, okay, what data are about overwhelmed feelings? The overwhelmed feelings came from my inductive analysis, but now I'm functioning at a deductive analysis. I don't know if that is a little confusing. Let me know, we can talk about it. And then here's the deductive. You notice that it looks very similar. So we're like in the middle here, and we're both, whether I'm doing an inductive or deductive analysis, I'm doing the same processes. I'll just give you a minute to check that out. All right. So the third round of analyses. Now, again, different people talk about these steps in different ways. I'm doing all of Brown and Clark's 6 steps. I'm doing Johnny Saldana. He talks about things in three groups, and other people have different steps. Just know, again, that the design or the type of analysis changes things, but ultimately all analysis goes through these 3 rounds, okay? Just different language and perhaps different purposes, but the processes are basically very, very similar, okay? So here I'm looking for theme identification. I'm reducing the data to the most appropriate data, and then I'm cross-checking. Okay, now this one back here, I'm just gonna go back for a moment. This is really hard to show in an hour. Again, if you're able to attend the boot camp, we will go through this and provide some examples. Okay, and then here again is some of my breadcrumbs and memoing. So when you see this video, I'm going to stop sharing now because I know that we're at the time. When you get the PowerPoint presentation that I send, and I'll send a few other documents, I'll find out some way to get it to you, okay? Then what we'll do is, if you have any questions on any materials, please just let me know. And the boot camp is on the 27th of this, so it's Saturday, the 27th of July, and then the 3rd of August. And we'll be 4 hours per day. So that gives us time to slow down, to focus on you, to focus on your analysis processes, and again, learn from each other, okay? Who has some questions?
Is there a cost for the boot camp that you mentioned since it's so much
There,
longer?
there is a cost.
Okay,
I can't remember off the top of my head what that cost is.
okay,
Um, but know that you get the 4 hours of video on both days. You get a ton of documents. I have templates for every, not that you need to use the templates, but it normally serves as a guide as you move forward. So you'll get all of that as well. And then you also get a free half hour with me to at on your own, and we get to talk about your analysis or your writing. Okay.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome, Sonia. All right. Any other? Yeah, Winnie, horizontalization or horizontalization is really this process of um, phenomenology, and it's a type of phenomenology, and there are several types. Um, but it's really where we're seeing these experiences that are resonant across the data. Um, and if you have questions on that, I have a couple of documents I can share with you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Yvette. I think what I will do is I'll go ahead and finish the recording. So if you want to hang out and um, uh, stay for the rest of the presentation, I'm just going to go through it really quickly so that you have that information. Tess, are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. I think it will only take about 15 minutes, but I just want to get it in there. Um, so yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you and your interest. All right, so a lot of times when I'm working with people, the urge to write is the a big deal, right? Like I got to feel like I'm moving forward, but I'm still in the midst of my analyses. So I say, go ahead and write your participant information. You should be able to at this position, and um, you again, you are the expert, so you can go ahead and write these this part of your findings. So let's take a look at that and what that looks like. We I normally recommend people providing group profiles and individual profiles, especially if it is a small sample size. The individual profiles are essential. If I have a large sample, then individual profiles probably are not the way I want to go, unless it might be a dissertation. But I think if you have um, up to 10 people, I would probably say I would still do individual profiles if it's a dissertation. If it's an article, I probably wouldn't do any more than about 6 participants for profiles, individual profiles. Um, so let's see here. So the group characteristics that I look at, I'm looking for the number of participants, I'm looking for overall demographics, and then information related to the phenomenon that helps my reader come to know who my participants are. This is key because if the reader doesn't understand who the participants are, it's going to be hard for them to wrap their heads around the data. So I really, the whole purpose of this is to help the reader understand who the participants are. The individual profiles, again, is to help the reader come to know the participants, but more on a personal level. I like to provide both the group profile and the individual profile. I think that those are both important. Now, if I only have 3 participants, I probably wouldn't do a group profile. I would let the individual profiles stand for themselves. Okay. Again, we're using pseudonyms or perhaps numbers. You identify relevant information to include, and I give you some examples here. And then we want to present the profiles in a specific structure. And so think about that, and I'll give you an example here. So here's an individual profile. It starts with their degree, and then it goes to their role, and then it goes to the topic. And in this case, it's implementing PBIS, which is a educational intervention, if you will, to support students with their social emotional learning. And so we see now a quote, and this is what I really like, is because it gives the gives the reader a sense for who this participant is. All right, so there's that. And then the last part of the presentation really has to do with our writing. And so how does our analysis inform our representation of the data? And I would say in every way it does, as well as the research design again. So let's take a look at the most common structure. So the common structure that I see by and large in articles, dissertations, theses, by and large, the thematic representation is most prevalent. I would even say in grounded theory, it's still an aspect of the themes. I'm just looking at steps in a process, okay? So if each theme was a step in the process, this would also hold true for grounded theory. So I want to provide a description of the context and the setting. I want the participants, I'm going to drop in a template that I have here for the participants section. So just bear with me for one moment, and I'll drop this in the chat. Okay, there we go. This is just something that I use to guide myself, and guide others in when they're starting to think about writing up your setting and your participant section. And then I look at the representation of the data, in this case, our themes, okay? This is where our writing structure and our analysis really merges, because now I want to be thinking about, well, which theme makes sense to put first? Which theme makes sense to put last? For me, if there's not a logical order because of the phenomenon I'm exploring or whatever, if they're all fairly equal in terms of their weight, I want to do the most revelatory, or the idea that is most interesting to me, I put last, because I want the reader to remember it most. Remember, we remember what comes first and what comes last. So the first and last, if all else is equal, I really focus on me and what I think are the important ideas. Or my participants, because that would be another way of them to do a member checking, is if I ask them, hey, how would you order these and why? Again, that to me is the highest level of member checking. Okay, now for some programs specifically, and sometimes some journals, they prefer to have people represent the findings according to the research questions. If so, this is how your writing might be structured. Okay, you would do the same thing, context, setting, participants, and then the findings would be separated into, if there were 2 research questions, research question 1 and research question 2. Okay. And then here is a representation that would be appropriate for case study or narrative findings. And that's where we have, like, say, 3 participants in the narrative aspect, and or case study, actually. It could be an organization or it could be a person. Now, the thing that's important here is that all the themes don't need to be the same. Quite frankly, oftentimes they're different. And that's why coming down here in the cross case analysis, when we get there, that comparison, that's where we start to say, oh, well, you know, for case 1, this idea was really important, but case 3 didn't really mention this. And then again, that's the importance of the context when that happens. Okay, then single case study, embedded units of analysis. Remember, I had mentioned those units of analysis before. I really like to show this visual because it represents my understanding and my process of how I analyze the data. If I am organizing the theme by principal data, superintendent data, and trainer data, I'm acknowledging that these people have different roles and therefore they have different understandings. So I'm going to honor that. And that's how I represent this. Sometimes I map this out before I start my analysis to keep me focused in how I'm doing my analysis, as far as what comes first, what comes second, or how am I grouping the data? All right. Okay, here's another example of this same thing. I might have school A and school B, theme 1, theme 2. In this case, I got this visual from one of the clients that I was working with, and she had public schools and private schools, and then there were 2 schools within each. And then in each school, principals and teachers were used. So you see how it gets more complex, but I still am doing the same process. I'm still doing a cross case analysis at the end, especially in case study. We want to do that cross case analysis. That's the whole reason why we do that. Narrative representations of data are a little bit more, I would say, organic, because we are looking for different things in our analysis. So that's where the research design matters, the type of analysis matters. I could do a narrative study, gathering stories, and then represent it thematically. And this is where I would say most people with narrative research, and I would say with phenomenology, that happens a lot. We say we're doing phenomenology and we collect that data, but then when we represent the data, it's very thematic. And it's not following the steps of phenomenological analysis, which is fine. We just need to be aware that there is a difference, okay? So in this case, we're looking at an overall composite story, perhaps using Clendenin and Conley. We're looking for the situation or the exposition, if you will, what's happening in the context. Then we have the main characters, rising action, falling action. So this idea of plot structure really comes out here. Or we could be looking at different challenges or turning points and persistence. Again, this was something that a participant, or excuse me, a client that I was working with, this is how we ended up deciding on how to structure her narrative findings, because of this focus on challenges and turning points and then persistence. And so in that case, the research question really came forward in helping us identify how it was that was the most appropriate way to represent the data. And I think that's how we want to really think about things, is what's the most appropriate way to represent the data, to be, to honor the participants and to honor the topic. And that to me really guides a lot of what I do. All right, and that got us done. I thought it would take us about 15 minutes. Anyone who stuck it out and stayed for this, do you have any other questions?
I think there are 2 questions in the chat. One by Brittany, but here. They want to know, they're curious how the participants concept is different if you're doing a content analysis. Like what do you do to help the reader know the text?
Yeah, that's so interesting. We would want to provide a detailed description of the phenomenon itself. So let's say that I'm looking at the political climate, and so I'm looking at, let's say, the presidential candidates' dialogue in their any kind of discourse or any kind of presentations, or maybe it's their debates. And I'm looking specifically, I'm not looking at the videos or anything, but I'm looking at the text itself. Then I'd really want to give that background of each candidate and then the debate itself, and then I would go into the data. So that's how that would look a little different. And that's such a great comment and question, because I think people forget to do that when our data is not interview data. We forget that the reader still needs that context, okay? And that context, again, I think that's the difference between qual and quant a lot of times, is that we really highlight the context and the importance of that. I hope that answered the question. And then let's see, was there another one, Tess?
Yeah, the second one is the database managed when you conduct the study, or does it include studies prior to conducting the study?
Yeah, I think I do it while I start it from the get-go, and I make a little plan for myself. Like here right now, this is how I'm thinking I will store the data and manage the data. And this is how I got myself, probably how I started thinking about this, is because I had done photo elicitation. That's one of my areas of expertise. And I didn't realize that I was going to have to scan all of my photographs in and then put them with the interviews. And because no one told me to think about how it was that I was going to manage this data. And so I think that's why I'm so sensitive of it now, is that especially when we have other forms of data, we really need to be thinking about this ahead of time so that we don't get caught off guard. All right. And then, the culturally informed approaches, yes. If you have a moment, let me just toss a couple of files in here for you. And then I'm going to provide you with let me just provide you with my email. And if you want these files, I think it'll be easier if you just go ahead and email me, and I'll send you what I have. There we go. And then thank you everyone for staying. I really am honored that you stayed longer, and I hope that this was helpful for you. Please reach out, let me know how I can help you further, and how I can learn from you. Have a fantastic rest of your day.